Hey everyone, Phreak here. Welcome to patch 8.16 for League of Legends. It's time for a rundown. It's going to be very, very exciting. At least I hope so. And yeah, 8.16 is a patch. It's coming out basically now. It's going to be the playoff patch for the North American and European LCS. It's also going to be not the playoff patch for LCK, and I believe the playoff patch for LPL, but I could be wrong. Either way, we know the Korean playoffs already started. They're starting at 8:15, and week 8 and now week 9 are going to finish out in 15 as well for North America and Europe, and that's where most of my audience is. One thing I'm also potentially going to do this video, although we'll see how I feel when I get to this section, is spending time on my thoughts on whether changes are actually really good or bad. And I know I've been wrong about stuff a lot before, and I'm not saying I'm some supreme ruler of game design, but if you're the kind of person who subs to my YouTube channel, you probably tend to like my rambling, so I might ramble some. Let's get into the patch though itself. And mostly this is a known patch that's heading towards playoffs. Like we know it's heading towards playoffs. I believe I think it's 18 is going to be the Worlds patch. So this is happening, and then 2 patches down the line, that's the Worlds cutoff, and then we all just plummet into preseason basically afterwards. So basically, design is winding down on how big the changes are, and the designers, as people, are spending more of their time prepping what they want to do for preseason. It's actually kind of a nice intersection of human beings' time and also not wanting the game to be volatile uh, as the season winds down. I kind of actually like that a little bit, so that's kind of convenient. Anyway, let's talk about this. So first off, alphabetically, every time is Aatrox. Aatrox is a 100% champion in pro play across 8.15. He was 99% presence across 8.14. Of note, he's actually 0-3 this patch in pro play, but he was 3-2 last patch. Every once in a while, people let him through. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. He's clearly not forcing wins so often that it's unbeatable, as we can tell by his overall 3-5 record in pro play since 8.14. Either way, I wanted to note that, wanted to let you guys know about that. And I think this is a very good change. I like that his sustain on minions is going down. I think that was always a little bit of a silly thing that he was able to do. I did not actually take the time to look at what Aatrox's base health regen is. I imagine it's a little bit below average, but not abysmal. And considering he can just spell vamp with his Q against minions, I think that going down is nice. This is going to feel worse for Aatrox than it will feel good playing against. You may subtly notice that, like, you're not getting smashed as often by, chain Qs with dashes in the middle, but I think Aatrox players are going to feel kind of slow, and that's going to be a little weird. But I think still good to sort of nerf what are kind of early game points. And then World Ender is 20, 10, and 0 seconds longer on cooldown. None of this really needed very heavy math. I just wanted to kind of point out what this was. All right, next up is changes to Fizz. Fizz definitely got overbuffed, so that was one that I was actually right about last patch. Fizz got overbuffed. His W got 1,000,000 damage added back because he lost the cooked mark triple damage mechanic. So they're keeping the base damage up there, but lowering the AP ratios. That's fine, I guess. It's about 85% as high, the ability power ratios, right? 1/8 or 1/6 off the ratio, lowering 1/9, etc. Just 0.1 off this is going to help a little bit. Ultimately, though, I guess the goal is that this is going to nerf late game Fizz when he builds a bunch of ability power. I'm always perennially concerned about tank Fizz coming back, but this should not be what brings tank Fizz back. But yeah, Fizz is nuts in solo queue. He actually has not seen that much in pro play. 18% presence across 8.15 is not that high, but that's North America and Europe, and we're the worst 2 regions. Of the regions I check. Next up, Hecarim buffs. Hecarim is basically 50% win rate champion in solo queue. I don't think he really needs any help. This is potentially compensation for Celerity being nerfed this patch. But I don't know. I guess I don't see the pretty weak currently part, because from what I see with public data, he's 50%, which means he's fine. But either way, getting some better scaling. I actually have numbers for this one. This is the first one I actually have math on. So of course, the damage caps out at max rank, 0 to 20 bonus damage. And the ability power, the attack damage ratio going up is a 17% bump in attack damage ratio. So ultimately, this buffs AD Hecarim more than tank Hecarim. So Triforce Cinderhulk tank is less buffed than like Triforce Cleaver Sterix. for what that's worth. Not that Triforce Sterix Cleaver was the build, but just, attack damage items. So that's kind of cool. I mean, again, I don't think he needs it, but I think these are pretty big buffs, to be honest. His primary damage tool in jungle clearing and his primary sort of team fight tool, pretty strong. Next up, Orianna nerfs. Orianna's also a champion. I don't think it needed nerfs that much. Basically, they're lowering her base MR by 4, and we'll go into the math on that in a little bit. But Orianna, pretty much a 50% win rate champion, and I think a reasonable pro play presence, around like the number 5-ish mid laner, about 35% presence in pick ban, roughly. So certainly good, certainly on the high end. Not one that I feel like would need preemptive nerfing personally, but oh well. And this also brings up the idea of more and more champions having different base stats. Now it's basically only Talon, Pyke, and Orianna, I think, are the only champions with non-standard magic resist. And I know I'm someone who, like, I like change in general, but I don't like change that stands out, right? Like, you're the only champion with different magic resist. Why? Your base stats are different, right? Like, Galio has, like, MR synergy in the kit, and so, like, I accept Galio has different MR, and not that his base MR is different, but, like, that he can reach different MR, right? Like, Taric and Malphite get bonus from armor purchases, but it's on the kit. I think it's fine that they're heavily armored and they're, armor tanks in that regard. Ram SW, same way, right? Orianna just, like, has less MR. And there's not, like, a kit reason, there's not a lore reason, it's just you just have less MR, so, like, now you're weaker to Syndra. And it feels just strange that that's the nerf. Because it, like, yeah, okay, I want to make sure that when people close the gap, they have a better shot at the kill, but, like, you can nerf health and health regen and stuff, right? And not that her health is not low already, it's actually very low because she has the shield, but, like, I don't know. It still feels a little strange, but it's not that big of a problem. Either way, here is the math. Her losing 4 MR is about 3% off her durability. The fact that you gain 0.5 MR per level doesn't change that much about it. She still has 3% less durability. With her E on, and the E I'm pretty certain is maxed last in all cases, it's 10 to 30 extra magic resist, and so it is a slightly less of a nerf when she has her E on, but still worth pointing out that even when she's sitting there at 49 magic, or 69 magic resist, or whatever it is, pretty sure that's the number, 69 magic resist, it's still a 2.5% durability cut to magic damage. If she goes Banshees, that's different, of course, but there you go. So yeah, Orianna is weaker to Syndra. I don't know. This just feels weird that, like, her matchups are bad into Fizz because of numbers you have to look up in a wiki. Next up is Quinn. Quinn is definitely overbearing. About a 55% win rate in her good rolls in solo queue. It's actually nutty. So nerfing her late game a little bit, nerfing her attack damage scaling from 3 to 2.4. Actually ends her at a nice clean 100. I think that's actually pretty reasonable. I think 59 is not, actually, it's slightly on the high side, but not insane. 59 to 100 attack damage at 59 to 110. That's pretty reasonable. I think ending at 110 is actually solid for a marksman. Marksmen tend to get a lot of attack speed scaling. I think Juggernauts can, get their bonus attack damage scaling instead, and that's fine. That way the champions can feel different. To add another sentence onto the, hey, base stats are a thing, I had actually remember asking a long time ago, one of the designers at Riot, and I was like, hey, why don't all champions in the same class just have templated base stats? Like, why can't, like, all marksmen have the same base stats, all mages have the same base stats, all juggernauts have the same base stats? And there were 2 points that were delivered to me, and I think both of them were good. One of them was base stats are a tuning lever. If champions need to be more or less durable, such as Draven compared to Vayne, Vayne gets to be evasive. Draven has to face tank. And yes, you could make, like, Blood Rush give him a shield to add kit reasons why he's more durable, but, like, it actually makes sense that Draven's base stats are higher than Vayne's. And that, like, it feels like it should be. He's a bit more armored, he's a bit sort of burlier of a person, and Vayne turns invisible. I think it's reasonable to expect that she's squishier. I think the problem comes when you have aberrations in that, though, and, like, champions look squishy, but they're not. We'll get into that later. The other part was, I kind of talked about it already, is you can have champions feel different, right? Karthus has abysmally bad attacks. His animation sucks, the projectile sucks, and the range sucks. But he has lay waste. Like, the game is basically telling you, dude, your autos suck. Just use lay waste. And so that happens. And so those are two reasons why base stats can be, and probably should be, different across champions, even among the same class. The reason I bring up base stat incongruencies, though, is it feels weird to have randomly skewed, oh, this champion is good against physical damage, and this champion is good against magic damage. Why? I don't know, some numbers are different. Like, I find it very strange when armor and magic resist are out of sync, or armor, magic resist, and health are out of sync, where, like, someone's health bar is really big, but their armor growth is really low, so they're actually less tanky than the guy with 300 less health than them. And, like, that's when things start to feel weird, because armor and magic resist as stats are fairly hidden. They do not show up anywhere unless you literally click on the character and look at the corner of your screen. Whereas health bars are on your screen all the time and actually tell you how many hundreds of HP they have. So I'm kind of the opinion that armor and magic resist should be almost all identical, and health is your differentiator because health is a visceral stat. Either way, we're talking about attack damage and attack speed growth. I like that marksmen generally gain attack speed and that juggernauts generally gain attack damage, and I think 100 is a reasonable attack damage number to end on as far as having visceral stats. I went down a rabbit hole because we're talking about Rakan now, and that's why I brought up base stats. Rakan has very strange base stats. So Rakan is technically ranged, which means he has 30 plus 0.5 per level magic resist. It's very, very low. The only champion in the game that has 480 health is Anivia. Technically Kled kind of, but that's not counting Skarl, which obviously does count. Rakan has the actual lowest real base health in the game now. 480 is the lowest in the game. A couple champions are sub 500. I forget exactly who, but champions other than Nivea. I think like Orianna is very low, for example, but of course Orianna has a self shield as well. We just nerfed her durability up there. Sure. Rakan has very, 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 very low health. And we can see those numbers right here. Here's Rakan's health. It went from 510 to 1955, and now it's 480 to 1925. Now, 1925 is pretty low. The number I've brought up several times before is 2,000. Ends up being, I think, a pretty reasonable round number to look at champions like Evelynn, and I believe also Akali is right around 2,000. The recently buffed Twitch and Jinx end right about 2,000. And so the generally like squishy but definitely not tanky champions who maybe frontline a little bit or can't get out very easily typically end around 2,000 health as a random number. What's interesting though is this guy has incredibly, incredibly high armor growth. He used to end at 102 and now ends at 99 armor. So even though 1925, you'd be like, oh, wow, he's got very low health. What a squishy champion compensated for by his shield. It's like, well, he's actually not squishy because though his health is low, his armor is so high, he's actually pretty tanky. He's actually more durable just sort of standing there without any abilities on than champions like Vi. And yes, of course, they both have their own durability tools and whatnot, but just at base stat level, he's actually one of the tankier champions in League of Legends. So 30 health and 3 armor off. Right, and tone down his early durability, make him a bit more easy to fight against in the early game. That's totally reasonable to do. I would have just liked to see that his health remain where it was because this was not an out-of-line health value. I think his armor being 36 at level 1 is exceptionally high. He's basically got like full melee champion armor, and that's not really, I think, a number he needs to have. And the reason I bring this up is because armor is essentially a multiplier for health regen. Like Rakan obviously heals himself. He has a passive that at first blush is basically flat HP. And then when it comes back up is now health regen. So Rakan essentially has health regen and flat health as a passive to, okay, short the fact that his base health and his base health regen are low. He also has his Q, which he hits someone and he heals himself and again becomes health regen. But the more armor and magic resist you have, the less damage you take, and yet does not lower the amount of health regen you gain. So by his armor being high, it actually betrays his health regen being low, because he takes less damage per hit, thus upping the value of his actual regen. You see where I'm going with this, where this is why I think care should be taken with base stats, especially things, I guess it's specifically armor and MR. Like health going up and down and health regen going up and down, at least those are like reasonably visceral and can be looked at to a certain degree, and you actually notice them moving, at least sometimes. I think armor and MR are incredibly invisible as stats. People look at items and go, ooh, Sejuani has a Warmog, she has a lot of health. Sejuani built a Frozen Heart, ooh, she's going to be hard to kill as I'm Ashe. But knowing whether or not Sejuani has 85 or 112 armor at level 18 is a really big difference, but no one knows that answer without looking up at a wiki. So anyway, what I'm saying is Rakan's armor is so high it betrays his low regen values. Either way, Rakan is definitely a really, really big deal. He is a 78% presence champion in pro play and has a pretty high win rate, above 50%. I spent a lot of time talking about base stats. We're going to move on now because that was my diatribe. Next up is Taliyah, and Taliyah definitely is overall way too strong. She has a solid 53% win rate in the solo queue, 94% pro play presence. She is in there all the time. What I do like, though, is I still think the redesign on Taliyah was a success. To say, hey, you're no longer the AoE wave clear champion, you have better jungling, you have better single target damage, your seismic shove into your E does more, you got a little more burst early game. I think those were all very good changes. I just think they obviously went overboard, and so they're finally walking this back, and that is good. Taliyah is going down to only plus 10 over the baseline move speed, 325 is the slowest of any normal champion. Not named Janna, because Janna is an aberration. Seismic Shove, going back to the old thing of actually having a level incentive, having a 4-second longer cooldown at rank 1. And I'm very happy about this. Weaver's Wall no longer grants vision. I really, really think active abilities that do not obviously have thematics around granting light should not grant vision. Lay Wastes from Karthus, Wall of Pain from Karthus, Trundle Pillars, all that stuff. I don't think they should grab vision because it's a random sort of BS way that a champion is stronger that I guess it kind of feels satisfying. Oh, I ulted and revealed Baron. That was cool. Good job, me. I made a smart play. But I think it actually is more of a buzzkill than it is a feel good. So I'm very happy this is going away. I'm very, very happy about that. It's a very good thing in my opinion. That vision should be on purpose. And if there's too little vision in the game, the designer should add vision back in sources that are on purpose. To give champions ways to give themselves and their teammates vision. But pressing Q overall, unless you're literally the light mage Lux, and in which case it's still only E, is kind of lame. Now, for what it's worth, there is one caveat that I will grant, which is I still think it's okay that Draven, Ashe, and Ezreal grant vision with their ultimates. Because in this case, the disconnect is worth the gain in fun in seeing your skill shot fly across the map and seeing how close you are to hitting someone. Lux the same, but Lux is actually a light mage, and I think it's completely passable. There are no eyeballs on Draven's ultimate, but I think it's a good thing that Draven can see how close he got. In terms of net fun for League of Legends, that's one that I will back up 100% of the time. But Weaver's Wall is not going to snipe people. All right. Either way, deserving of nerfs. Taliyah will still be on the strong side, but hey, good thing to see. All right, next up is Trundle. Trundle is losing 0 to 40 base damage off his Q, but gaining 0 to 0.2 total attack damage on the attack damage ratio of the ability. What does this mean for damage? Well, here you go. Because the attack damage ratio grows, and it's total AD, so it grows with his actual attack damage, and his attack damage growth is very high, by the way. The damage does not actually end at minus 40. It ends at minus about 16, which is not nearly as bad. Of course, it's still down. You're still losing almost 10% of your Q damage, which is non-trivial. And in fact, to gain that kind of damage back with your 0.2 higher ratio, right, 80 attack damage times 0.2 becomes 16 bonus damage. It'll take a while to have your Q do more damage than before, right? This is going to take you 128 to 81 bonus attack damage, which is not going to happen for jungle Trundle ever. Even if you go Trinity Force, you're not going to reach that. Even with runes, you're not going to reach that. But if you are going Rune King Ravenous Hydra, you're going to get there. You're going to get there pretty quickly. And okay, cool. Also worth pointing out, of course, that Trundle's Chomp gives 20 to 40 bonus attack damage, which then directly feeds into the Q, of course. And it would buff the old damage, it buffs the new damage slightly more. And so we have, okay, it takes 128 to 81 attack damage to buff the damage output, or to equalize the damage output. After I chomp, it takes between 103 and 41 attack damage. Now, 41 attack damage is obviously going to happen, right? 41 AD is nothing. You're missing 8 damage, and 41 attack damage is runes in a Ruin King. That's always going to happen for attack damage Trundle. So AD Trundle catches up by around level 11, I would say, roughly. That's probably about the time you start getting that much attack damage in, unless you're rushing full Ravenous. Either way, definite nerfs to tank, and there's a decent chance it's still a nerf to attack damage Trundle, just because you have to still suffer through these first 7 to 12 levels without having the same ratio, so your landing phase is objectively weaker, period. And of course, this stolen attack damage is down for 3 seconds, so carries buff for less long, hurts his opponents for less long. Want to also point out, by the way, Trundle is an absolute monster in pro play right now. He is the number 4 overall pick in pro, and I believe that makes him the number 1 overall jungler, or number 2 behind Talia. Talia's a flex. Trundle's a really, really big deal. He's also a 51.5% win rate jungler, but a 49.5% win rate top. So attack damage Trundle could use the buffs. This will nerf AD Trundle less than it nerfs jungle Trundle, but it might not actually still be a buff to him, and so we might see top lane Trundle lose some win rate here, which hopefully he gets compensation for later. Next up, Tryndamere. Not in pro play, obviously, but fairly high win rate top laner, reverting the spinning slash buffs because turns out Nash's Tooth Lichbane Tryndamere is a little bit insane, so yeah. He definitely does have access to CDR, and I know there's some AD Tryndameres out there who are like, wait a second, but I wanted my builds to be... That's kind of too bad. I don't know. Maybe Spinning Slash needs to have a like percent of remaining cooldown trigger instead of a flat 1 second per hit cooldown trigger. That would make CDR Tryndamere less overbearing and non-CDR Tryndamere more usable. That's a good way to soften that. While still making CDR a good stat, it would be less snowballing. Maybe that should happen. Next up, nerfs to Wukong. Wukong is obviously, I think all of us know, absolutely nuts. 52 to 54% win rate based on rolls. Absolutely insane champion. Still really not seeing almost any pro play. Shout out to Caps for playing the champion, but really no one's doing it. Wukong is definitely insane, and it took far too long for people to realize. I think I brought this up in the last patch rundown, but I remember a while ago he got buffed, and I feel like I was kind of quizzical as to why, because I thought he was already a good champion. Maybe not super satisfying, maybe not super high skill, but really, really, really strong. So he's losing 20 flat damage off the Q, and he's losing 0.1 total attack damage off the AD ratio. Here is Wukong, losing 25 to 9% of the damage on the ability, which is what you get when you drop about 33 damage off the ability. Also of note is the attack damage ratio going down by 0.1 is a 9 to 7% nerf. So ultimately, the more items you buy on Wukong, the less this nerf matters compared to before, but still a pretty sizable damage nerf. Keep in mind it is still an attack auto attack reset, so even though the ability has literally 10 base damage and a 1.0 attack damage ratio at rank 1, which is the rank you're going to have until level 8, even though it literally does 10 damage, that is all the ability does, is 10 damage. It is still an auto attack reset, meaning it's not 10 damage. It's really more like 78 because you wouldn't have gotten that auto attack off otherwise. The ability could literally do 0 damage always and still be worth pressing the button. Like, I want to point that out, that like, even though this is the lamest numbers ever, it's still valuable. It's also an armor shred. So this will bring Wukong down a fair bit. Later on in the patch, there's quite a few rune changes as well, which we'll go into. All of which will definitely hurt Wukong's abusiveness in early lane, and I think he'll drop a solid 2% win rate this patch, and Wukong will finally be back to balanced-ish. I assume at some point in the next 2 years, they'll do some kind of small gameplay update to the champion and make him a bit more interesting. I remember reading the Reddit thread on these patch notes, and someone was like, well, what do you think happens when you move the counterplay to invisibility? It's like, dog, you didn't buy control wards to show him in team fights. Shut up. Like, people overblow how much invisibility matters, I feel like, in a lot of cases, but whatever. Next up is Zoe, and everyone's happy there's Zoe nerfs. And I remember when the changes to Zoe first started happening, I had thought it would be better if Zoe was less of a poke mage and more of a sustained battle mage. It appears, though, that everyone's opinion now is, nope, make her just a poke champion, don't give her the battle mage fallback pattern. And I think either one is a fine direction. I just think it's kind of interesting that it seems that community sentiment is that they would rather battle mage Zoe go away and poke mage Zoe stay as good, essentially. And that's fine. I mean, again, I think you either sharpen strengths or you dull strengths and, round out the champion a bit more. I know that if a champion only has a single point of power and that's all they do, that point of power is almost definitely going to be frustrating, but maybe that's okay. For example, Tahm Kench's only strength as a support is eating teammates, basically, and it's really frustrating. Either way, I'm not here to pass judgment on whether it's the right ability change or not. I think it's one of two possible directions, and I think this direction is fine. Either way, so big nerfs to more sparkles in base value and attack damage ratio, and big nerfs to spell thieves ability power ratio. More sparkles is specifically the Lich Bane passive. So I actually screwed up and did not do what I normally do with more sparkles and stuff like this, which is include the attack damage in the ability, because you cannot trigger more sparkles without triggering the actual attack. But this is basically her Lich Bane passive. The damage is down 80, about 20% in the early game, down as far as 30% in the mid game, and then catches back up to almost 90% value by the end game. So troughs in the mid game, troughs at 9, which is when her Q power spikes the hardest. I think that's probably intentional, that it troughs as Q ranks up, and then as you scale into late game, it softens up. Zoe as a champion, by the way, tends to skew towards early game victories. She has a sub 50% win rate past 30 minutes. That's usually either because all her wins forced surrenders already, which, okay, fair, and or now you have tanks who can eat the bubbles and eat the Qs. We're in the team fight phase now, and poke champions aren't as good. And this is why I am a little, ever so slightly hesitant about the making her more of a poke champion, is because she is already the early game poke abuser who falls off in late game team fights. And this says, well, you're still the early game poke abuser, but you definitely fall off in late game team fights. And generally speaking, I have found that players don't tend to like that. That when it's like, man, Draven is sure oppressive in lane. Well, don't worry, you outscale him. Sure, Caitlyn's really annoying. Don't worry, you outscale her. People don't tend to respond well to that, right? Like Darius is like the second most banned champion in all of League of Legends who is exclusively a lane bully. I just find that kind of interesting. But again, I don't think it's wrong to double down on, well, not even double down, but keep the strength and then nerf the weakness, which is her late game team fighting, basically. And this is what this would have provided her. Either way, the passive ability power ratio is down by 60%. The W ability power ratio down to 60%. The W ratio down to 70%. Pretty big hits there. So she's less reliable ultimately, right? She's less reliable. She has to land skill shots. But her skill shot damage is just as high as it ever has been, really. All right. And Zoe was like the number 6 champion in pro play, so totally deserving and worthy of nerfs. All right, so next up, there's a big bucket of changes to tanks. Amumu, Leona, Nautilus, Rammus, Sion, and Tahm Kench all getting changes. So Amumu is an interesting one. Basically, he has some base damage reduction on his E, which is 2 to 10, and then every 100 armor is 3 more, and every 100 magic resist is 3 more. What's interesting, I looked this up, so I'm pretty sure it's true. The damage reduction is done after armor and magic resist, meaning that Amumu now self-snowballs tankiness, right? Because if you were to take half damage from physical damage and reduce it by 10, you've, essentially kind of reduced it by 20 and then taken half in a different way. If you add another 100 armor, you now take 1/3 damage and then reduce that by 13. But if it was like, let me put it this way. If you're going to take 100, but now you take 50, and you actually take 40, okay, that's what you did. You lowered 100 to 40. If you buy another 100 armor, you lower 100 to 33 to 20, right? Going from 100 to 200 armor is normally 50% more durable. Now, it's 100% more durable. So that's the example that I want to bring up because that's a pretty big deal, right? Now, I don't think these numbers are so good that Amumu becomes insane, although it is possible because it is hard to fully guess how big those numbers are going to be. And again, it's going to snowball. So now really, unless you're getting crit, like if you're getting hit by like Blade of the Ruined King Lucian, who's hitting you multiple times per shot, like that second bullet could do 5 damage at a certain point. It also means that Amumu really, really, really wants to spike hard on one resist to really clamp down on that damage type. Like both armor and MR still flood into the same bucket in terms of being a flat damage reduction, but the lower percentage you drop a damage source, the more the after resist flat value matters, if that makes sense. So Amumu could be invincible, potentially. Like, it's hard to say, but there's a chance Amumu gets insane with this kind of thing going on. Next up, buffs to Leona. And by the way, Amumu was fine. He was like a 50% win rate champion, so he didn't really need the help, it felt like, but I feel like he might get nutty, or it might not mean much. I'm not sure. It's hard to say. But you're probably going to start wanting to max E second or first to capitalize on this as fast as possible. Next up is Leona. 51.5% win rate, 1 to 4 seconds off the the cooldown of her W. Meaningful stuff there. There you go. I want to point out that Leona W lasts almost 6 seconds, or actually exactly 6 seconds, if the Eclipse Explosion hits someone, which means with max CDR, you have W on permanently. That's a really big deal. So big buff to Leona. Leona's already good. She's going to be nutty. Next up, Nautilus changes. And this one's going to be kind of interesting. -5 to +15 on the base shield. +0 to -0 to 4% on the max health scale. Duration down 4 seconds, but the cooldown down 6 seconds. There's a lot of math here. So here's the first chart. Okay. So this is looking at Nautilus's base stats. Assuming you're maxing W second, which is the most common order for him. And if you max W second, here's how much the shield was, here's how much it is now. And it's a 4% nerf to 3% nerf for the first 7 levels, which is very, very little. But it goes down to a 15% nerf at level 18 because of the ratio change. And if you are, again, going to buy health, because of course you are, the ratio is unchanged, levels 1 through 7, and goes down to a 24% ratio nerf by level 18. So, or even by level 13, really. So, in the early game, barely worse at all. It's 5 health less, that is it. So your laning phase pre-ultimate, your jungle path, your laning phase as a support as well, all of that basically the same, 5 less, no big deal. In the late game though, the shield gets definitely weaker. Okay, no, of course the cooldown went down. That was the entire point of the shield getting weaker as the cooldown went down. Well, the cooldown is 1/3 as big as it was before. And so what I looked at is, look, assuming you're not constrained by mana, and that's an asterisk, how much shielding per minute are you getting, right? If we're in a long team fight and I get 3 shields off instead of 2 shields off, or even if I'm really lucky, I get 2 shields off instead of 1, but we're going with the standard 67% here, 3 instead of 2, you're getting between 44 and 25% more shielding. If mana is not a constraint, you are blocking much more damage over time. Because I think the likelihood of you getting a second or third shield off is quite high. And if your fights are exactly 12 seconds long, and you have a little bit of CDR, when you get 2 shields instead of 1, and the bump is even bigger. Of course, if the fight is super short, and it's 6 seconds long, you only get 1 shield, then it is worse, so, keep that in mind. But on average, you're getting more shielding from these changes. But what about the actual uptime? Well, we have the old duration of 10 seconds, the new duration of 6 seconds, which is 60% of the duration, obviously. The old cooldown is 18, new cooldown is 12. Sure, again, we already looked at that, 67%. But the uptime on your shield, the duration versus cooldown was 56% before, as only 50% now. So it's actually larger windows in terms of a relative scale, not an absolute scale, because it's a 6 on 6 off instead of 10 on 8 off. But more percentage of the time, Nautilus is theoretically unshielded. which means maybe there's more chances to get like your hits in on the champion. But in general, I will say though that this ability costs 80 mana. And if mana is not a major constraint, and I know it is for him frequently, but if mana is not a major constraint, I would say this is a buff to Nautilus, because I think the significant cooldown cut is big enough to say you're going to get more shielding, you're going to get your damage off from your W more often, because once you have your shield up, you get to swing for bonus damage. I think those are very, very valuable. But of course, mana is a constraint, and that can be a really big deal. One other thing I want to point out is there is a chance, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but there is a chance that you no longer want to rank up W past rank 1. Getting 10 plus 1% health is worse than 5 plus 2% health. So your level incentive on W has gone down slightly, and plenty of your power is still in rank 1 of the ability, right? 9 out of 13 of the percent for the health ratio, and 6 out of 10 for the base shield value. Now the damage still scales, don't get me wrong on that one, but your level incentive has gone down for W. There's a chance that you 1-point wonder it, and instead rank Q second. And use that as a damage tool, use that as a catch tool, use that as an evasive tool. And I think Q is actually a pretty fun ability for Nautilus, and I don't think it would be wrong to go and grab your, I think it's like down to a 10-second cooldown at max rank, tossing Qs around. So something to consider. Either way, it's hard to say for sure this is a buff to Nautilus. Either way, he is a 50%-ish win rate support, slightly weak top laner. We'll see what happens. Next up is Rammus. Rammus is quite strong. He's above 50% win rate, getting another flat 10% on the bonus armor, another flat 5% on the bonus magic resist. Not really worth doing a bunch of math on that. He's already fairly strong. He'll remain fairly strong. Next up is Scion, also not doing a lot of math in this one. 25% more max health, or sorry, 30% more max health from killing enemies, and 50% more max health from killing big enemies. 3 becomes 4, 10 becomes 15. Again, another 51.5% win rate champion. Seems to be fine, seems to be viable, just becoming stronger in the late game. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I mean, Sion's going to be very strong. And I'm very glad, by the way, that Sion has been reshaped into a Q-Max. I think E-Max Sion was very, very lame, and I'm glad it's gone. Next up is changes to Tahm Kench. Ooh, Tahm Kench getting big changes. He is a 49% win rate top laner, a 48% win rate support, which are both pretty respectable, and the number 3 overall pick in pro play. Tahm Kench is a big deal. So first up, some usability to the Q. They're lowering the slow duration, but lowering the cooldown as well, so he has more buttons to press in a team fight. Mathematically, that is 75% as long for the slow and 83% as long for the cooldown. Technically a nerf in overall CC duration, but not the end of the world. The big changes are here to Devour and Regurgitate. It no longer scales duration with rank. Right, no longer scales 4 to 6, it's now a flat 4. Enemy duration is now a flat 2 instead of 2 to 3. That's a pretty big deal. That's a pretty big deal. You cannot save people for as long. You cannot kidnap them for as long. That is very, very relevant. The bigger change, though, is the cooldown getting doubled at rank 1, but scaling down rapidly with rank. However, the cooldown is halved on enemy cast. So what that means is, here's Tahm Kench. So on the left-hand side of this chart is your ally cooldown. 14 becomes 10, is now 18 becomes 16. It is 2 to 1.6x the cooldown. It's a really big deal. Only 1 chomp per wave is certainly quite a big deal there, so there's that. Of course, the cooldown is halved on eating an enemy, so it is at the first rank the same cooldown, and it scales down to only 80% as long later on. The fact that the cooldown Devour goes down to 8 seconds of eating an enemy is a pretty big deal. Now, of course, your eating duration goes down by a full third. 3 becomes 2, so your duration's down by a third, but your cooldown's down by 20%. That's still less devouring overall, or at least less time being devoured. His overall crowd control has gone down, with the exception being it is more reliable because your tongue lash comes up a second time sooner. right? Auto Q, auto, chase, 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 stun comes out 1 second faster. Now you can devour them. So that's going to be a big usability update. Also, the mana cost going down on devour by 30 mana, also going to help that. So you're going to have more frequent devours on enemies. They're going to be less impactful, though. I think it's okay. I think Tahm Kench could definitely use a frustration down move, and I think that's ever so slightly this. But yeah, the fact that is a really, really, really big cooldown nerf to allies, and that is going to really sledgehammer him in the support role. Which, I'll be honest, I'm okay with. Maybe you're not, but that's how I feel about it. Next up, big hits to runes. Aerie losing 5 damage early game, but gaining 5 shielding. Electrocute, losing 20 to 40 damage and some ratios, but getting a better cooldown. Look at those keystones. So here's Aerie's damage and shielding compared to before. Damage down by a full third in the early game. Of course, keep in mind the ability power ratio is still there and all of that. So in the real world, because runes exist and items exist, it's not really down this far. In fact, I should have just included the basic sorcery bonus for being in the sorcery tree and included that in the damage here. That would have been more fair. But either way, it is still down 5 damage in the early game, and it happens very frequently, so this will definitely add up over the course of the game. The shielding is up 5 in the early game, and that seems cool. Okay, the electrocute change, though, is a pretty big deal because the damage is down by a lot, the ratios are down by quite a bit, and the cooldown is down by even more. So here's electrocute. Okay, so the damage, first off, down 60% in the early game, down 18% in the late game. The ratio is down 20% as the attack damage ratio. It's down 17% as the ability power ratio. Close enough. So, okay. A pretty meaningful cut to the amount of damage dealt, right? To the tune of non-trivial 20 to 40 and another 0.2 on the ratio. Or, 20% of the ratio. The interesting thing, though, is the cooldown got massively sliced off. And you can see on the right-hand side here, the cooldown starts at half the cooldown in the early game and still is 20% off in the late game. And in fact, if you're able to reliably trigger electrocute, your damage per minute from the keystone is actually better. Electrocute could arguably be a stronger keystone for laning champions. Especially if you're playing something like Zyra or even Bard, who's pretty good at getting multiple hits off. That's kind of scary. I don't think it's an oversight, but I think it's kind of strange that the actual DPS of the keystone went up. That's a little nutty to me. But yeah, such as it is. Next up, though, celerity getting cut down by, it's basically what, 5/8 is good before, 37% off of it. That's pretty meaningful. I think that was the right thing to do. This will be a nerf to Nocturne, because Nocturne is a big celerity user, but I mean, there's lots of people who are celerity users. I mean, ultimately, yeah, celerity ended up being this rune that, I mean, at the end of the day, I actually wish, I don't know, there's 2 ways about it, right? It is either this is the rune that you build on move speed champions like Singed, or it's the rune that you pick up to give yourself move speed. I kind of like the idea of the rune. So I'm of 2 minds, because I think if it's just, well, if you have move speed buffs, it's a good rune for you. Just means, well, I'm playing Nocturne, so I always go celerity, or I'm playing Hecarim, so I always go celerity, or, you know, any other champions like this, I just always go celerity because I have move speed on my kit, so why wouldn't I? Cassiopeia, probably another great example of this. So that's you know, the one side where it's kind of lame, where it's like, it's a kit hook. Yeah, well, then you just pick it all the time. On the other, just giving move speed to people, like if it was just move speed and nothing else, that in and of itself is almost lame, because it's just move speed. It's kind of boring, and also I like when champions have reliable stats. I mean, I talked about armor and MR before. I think move speed should also be something that is done deliberately, and that getting betrayed by move speed runes, I don't know. That feels weird to me. Maybe it shouldn't. I don't know. It's a random thought. Either way, more nerfs happened. Cheap shot going down by half in the early ranks. There you go. It's down by 7 to eventually 0 damage. It's true damage, it's pretty meaningful, but there's that. Sudden impact down by 3 lethality or 2 magic pen is going to be a 1.5 to 2% or so damage cut when sudden impact is triggered. That's, of course, a Wukong nerf as well. Scorch just halved in damage, but halved in cooldown. So unlike Electrocute, which was DPS positive, Scorch can only ever be worse in this case. Because your first Scorch is weaker, and then if you're lucky, you get a second Scorch off. And if you don't, you're just worse. So Scorch has got straight hit. Scorch, by the way, fights Gathering Storm. I am 99% certain. So we're never going to see Scorch again, probably. We'll just see Gathering Storm for it on everyone. The other one, what is the other rune down there? I'm blanking. Oh, Water Walking. Yeah. You still see Water Walking on jungle. You'll just see Gathering Storm on every just every champion now. I think this actually kills Scorch. I think it was close enough to Gathering Storm that it was fine, and now it's just gone. But maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? Heal getting buffed by 30 seconds. The context being that when Heal got nerfed to help make teleport show up everywhere, I think it's a good thing to revert. I don't think it's, I think Heal is allowed to have a 4-minute cooldown. Definitely would like to see less TPs overall in League of Legends. That would be a positive to me. So anything that makes that happen, I think is good. You can show off your summoner level in borders and banners and game lobbies. That's cool. Stuff to end of game lobby is pretty cool. There's a bug fix for going into that stuff. There's some skins, Mafia Braum, Mecha Aurelion Soul. These are all pretty cool. These all look really sweet. And they've even all got chromas. So that's pretty sick. These all look super awesome. Also want to point out, by the way, that Nexus Blitz coming out this patch, it's going to be pretty sweet. Okay, TLDR 8.16. Nexus Blitz is super fun. You should play it. Aatrox getting a pretty big sustained nerf, some early game nerfs with all of this. Yeah, definitely an overbearing laner. Good to see laning phase going down. People are learning how to play the champion. They're getting better at team fighting with him. That's pretty cool. Fizz is bonkers overpowered. His AP ratio is going down. It's going to lower his burst a little bit, but he will still be overly strong in my opinion. Hecarim is generally fine, but gaining up to 20 damage and a 0.1 attack damage ratio on his Q. That's a really big deal. Hecarim will be strong. Orianna seemed fine, but is losing 4 magic resist, which is going to be about a 3% durability cut against magic damage. Okay, she'll be a bit weak, but fine overall. Quinn is overbearing and losing 0.6 attack damage per level. She will still be too strong. Rakan losing 30 health and 30 armor, 30 health and 3 armor. Definitely a very high win rate champion. Will still be very high. We'll still see pro play and is still tankier than people think because this is a very, very high armor count and his armor scaling is very high as well. Talia definitely needs the nerfs as well. Very, very strong champion, losing some mobility, losing cooldown on W until level 18, and losing vision on R. These are all very good nerfs in my opinion. She will still see pro play. She will still be good in solo queue. And will probably hop off the 90% pick ban train, but maybe I'm wrong. Tank Trundle going to lose quite a bit of power. I think Trundle will still see about the same amount of pro pick presence. He will be definitely weaker in the jungle. Basically, once you buy 2 full attack damage items, Chomp is as good to stronger. So attack damage Trundle needs to scale to get to the part where he's as good again. But otherwise, not too bad for him, but Tank Trundle definitely losing some power. Tryndamere losing some cooldown on Spinning Slash. He's going to get hurt. He was slightly strong, so that's fine. Wukong losing quite a bit of damage off Crushing Blow. He will still be too strong. Zoe losing all of her damage that's not Q and E. It's a solid 15% damage cut or more to more sparkles, a solid 20% or so cut to Spell Thief's ability power ratio. Going to be more poke reliant, more skill shot reliant, and a worse team fighter. We'll definitely drop a couple of slots in pro play. Will probably still be banned all the time in solo queue. Amumu might scale out of control. This damage reduction comes in after armor and MR from what I've read, so he will self-snowball tank stats. Tank Amumu may become invincible. There's a chance. Leona W. Yeah, cool. With max CDR, you can have 100% uptime on W, which is pretty cool. I'm pretty sure that's how that would work. She's already pretty strong, so will remain quite strong. Nautilus, if he doesn't run out of mana, this should generally be a buff to how much shielding he can provide himself over the course of a team fight. Individual shields are weak, but they come up much more often. And as long as he can stomach the costs, he'll be fine. Slight buffs to Rammus. Rammus is already pretty strong. Slight buffs to Sion. Sion's already pretty strong. Tom Kench is getting Well, support Tompkins is getting pretty hard sledgehammered. He's losing a lot of cooldown and ally devour duration on his W. As far as enemy devours, it's not quite so bad. You can get your second tongue lash out a bit faster, and the overall cooldown for eating an enemy champion is going to be weaker. So ultimately, should be okay. Also, because it's halved on enemy cast, also doing things like QW to like spit a minion should be lower cooldown by higher ranks as well. Next up, a lot of runes lost out on some damage. A very small touch to Airy, a pretty small touch to Electrocute in damage, but damage per second for Electrocute has gone up. If you're able to reliably trigger Electrocute, your actual damage from the keystone is going up, which means if you're a laning support like Zyra, you're probably getting more out of it. And if you're a jungler like Talia, if you're going to run Electrocute Talia, your damage has gone down because you're only getting one burst at a time. Pretty big hurt to Celerity down here. This is going to make Absolute Focus more common, which I think is fine. Cheap Shot losing 7 damage in the early game. Sudden Impact losing 3 lethality and 2 Magic Pen. And Scorch losing half its damage but half the cooldown are all going to weaken Poke and all-ins in laning phase. So ultimately, I think these nerfs are all fair nerfs. I think Electrocute is maybe wrong, but we'll see. Heal getting better by 30 seconds seems nice as well. So overall, a lot of ways for champions to live longer. Now, has Riot gone too far with making champions live longer? I don't know, but I remember the Circle Jerk a month ago was damage is too high, and Circle Jerk now is there's no damage, no one dies. I disagree, because these changes are not so big that suddenly everyone's invincible. That's my take. Either way, that's the patch. It's pretty cool. It's the NAEU playoff patch. And I'll see you next time.